Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel meeting of the 27th of July 2020. On behalf of the panel, I recognise the traditional custodians of the land, the Ku-ring-gai people, on whose land we meet. I'll just go through the order of business here, and then we'll introduce the members of the panel and we'll continue with the proceedings. These are preliminaries that have been brought in mainly because of the online nature of the meeting that we're doing now. In line with social distancing requirements to limit the spread of COVID-19 virus, Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel meetings may be held using conferencing technology, and today's meeting is being conducted on Zoom. Any person speaking at a local planning panel meeting are advised that their voice and personal information, including name and address, will be recorded as part of the meeting and made publicly available on Council's website via live stream and on-demand access, except any part of the meeting that is held in closed session. The closed session occurs usually at the end of the meeting when the panel goes into conference to discuss and decide its decision. Accordingly, you must ensure that your address to the panel is respectful and that you use appropriate language and refrain from making any defamatory statements or discriminatory comments. Now, the Ku-ring-gai Council does not accept any liability for statements, comments or actions taken by individuals during the meeting of the Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel. People connecting to this meeting by conferencing technology are reminded that under the Local Government Act 1993, the recording of meetings by a member of the public using any electronic recording device, including a mobile phone or video camera, is not permitted. Any person found recording without the permission of the council.
This meeting is being recorded.
May be expelled from the meeting. Some points to note. On-demand viewing of each Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel meeting will be available until the holding of the subsequent meeting. Recordings of Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel meetings are copyright protected and cannot be reused or reproduced without the approval of the council. Now, the members of the panel here today, two of us are in chamber. That's myself, Kevin Hoffman as chair, and Jim Coleman at the end of the table here. And then we have Gregory Flynn on the web and Peter Thornton on the web. Can I introduce the panel more formally? Briefly, I'd like each of them to give a quick summary of their experience so that you know the expertise that is available here on the panel. As chair, my name is Kevin Hoffman. For 14 years, I was Commissioner of the Land and Environment Court of New South Wales, presiding over disputes on property and development and environmental matters not dissimilar to the applications before us today. Prior to that, I was a founding director of a private consultancy firm in architecture, town planning and landscape architecture. And prior to that, I was chief town planner of a region of New South Wales for the local council. Can I ask Greg Flynn? Greg, if you'd give a brief summary.
Yes, hello. My name's Greg Flynn. Yeah, you can call me Greg, actually. I've had over 35 years experience in state and local government as a town planner, and worked the majority of that time in the major release area councils of Sydney and the Central Coast, and heavily involved in release area planning and infrastructure costing, etc.
Right. Thank you, Greg. Peter Thornton, could I ask you? Hello? Peter, I think you've dropped out. Am I online again? Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I'm sorry about that break, but we lost one of the panel members who is online. So while we're trying to get him back, I will ask Mr. Coleman to give a brief summary of his experience. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, my name is Jim Coleman, James Coleman. I'm an architect and planner. I've been in practice for many years, not only in Sydney, but all over Australia, really, and in many overseas countries as well. So I regard myself as a sort of a generalist. I'm also a past member of the New South Wales Heritage Council, and I've done a lot of freelance writing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, James. Now, Peter Thornton, we have you back online.
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
Summary of your
I'm a member of the panel as a community member. I've resided in the municipality, I think, for more than 50 years in total in a number of different locations. I practice as a consulting engineer, and I've got more than 40 years experience in all forms of major public infrastructure, particularly transport, but also in lots of other forms of development. Kevin, is it appropriate I just read out my declaration?
Yes, well, that's the very next thing on the agenda.
Okay.
Panel members, just hold on, Peter. Panel members are required to make any declarations of interest if they have a conflict with any of the matters before the panel today. Now, as chair, I can say I don't have any conflicts that I know of. And could I ask Greg, do you have any conflicts?
No, I don't have any conflicts.
And Jim, do you
No,
have
I
any
do not have any
conflicts?
conflict.
Thank you. That's 3. Now, Peter, you have a concern.
Well, I would just like to say I don't think I do have a conflict of interest, but I'd just like to read out my declaration for the record. I should say, for the record, I do know Dave Fitzsimons, who is registered to speak, albeit not well, and from a long time ago when both of our children attended Kalara Primary in or around 1988. I have never had any dealings either in the form of personal friendships or in business with David since that time. I was not aware of his connection with the applicant until I received the notification that he had registered to speak.
All right. Well, as chair, I've heard your statement, and I agree with the concept that I don't see it as being a matter of more than, what, 22 years ago?
I think so.
And since there's been no personal connection since, I don't see that as a matter that would exclude you from the deliberations of the panel today. So having dealt with the declarations, can I ask the staff who are present here today, do they have any conflicts?
There are no conflicts.
Thank you. That's Michael Murphy. Now we've got
Sean Garland, no conflict.
right, and
Grant Walsh, no
Grant
conflict.
Walsh,
No conflict.
Jonathan Goodwell. Yes, I don't think that'd be recorded too well. Now at the back we've got the engineer.
Brian O'Connell, no conflict.
All right, thank you, Brian. So you've heard all the declarations. Now we can turn now to the agenda, and there's only one matter on the agenda today. It is item GB1 for 2 Merriweather Street, Gordon, partial demolition of existing structures and construction of a shop top housing development with basement car park. And it's DA 0344/19. So turning to that, I have listed speakers. Now we usually hear from the speakers and any, which can include the applicant, any objectors. We don't have any objectors at this point wishing to speak today. There were 2 written objections in our reports, and I can advise the panel that all the panel has visited the site and the surrounds, and that we've read the reports, which you can see here there's a bundle of reports, and both from the applicant and from the council officers. We've got a set of the full plans that the applicant presented. And so we feel that we have enough information at this point anyway to consider the application before us. Now, those speaking, I have Gary Chapman, David Fitzsimons and Dougal Mackenzie. I believe you're all present.
Yes.
Yeah, we're present.
Chair.
Yep.
Who would like to speak first?
We thought, if I could, Chair, that David would speak first.
All right.
I would follow as the applicant's town planner, and Dougal Mackenzie is the architect who can answer questions of the panel if required.
Okay, so Dougal Mackenzie is the architect. David Fitzsimons is again the...
David, you're the owner of the property,
Owner.
are you not?
Right.
I'm an owner.
And Gary
Yep.
Chapman?
I'm the applicant's town planner.
Town planner, good.
Chair. Yep.
Thank you. Well, let's go first. I think we'll be reasonably informal in that we'll hear what you have to say. Normally we give 3 minutes to the speakers, and there's a chime that will sound when you get to that. Now, the panel will have questions of each speaker, and as that develops, we may address questions to each of you in series. So if you're happy with that arrangement, let's hear from your first speaker, who I think is
Yeah.
Gary Chapman.
Oh, we thought we'd do it the other way, Chair, if that's all right. We'd have David speak first. Is that
Okay,
acceptable?
David Fitzsimons.
Yeah, hi, David here. So I'm an owner, I'm a structural engineer and a builder, 50 years experience in building. I first thought about redeveloping this site in 2009 when my company, Aranac, being primarily builders of domestic dwellings, became a tenant in the rear of the partially completed office building. The rear building comprises 1,000 square metres of pre-stressed concrete on substantial piled foundations. Less than 20 years old, so it was immediately obvious that a tower at the front was the best solution. I remain convinced that it would be a poor outcome for all stakeholders to demolish this existing structure in the name of ticking design boxes. I continued thinking about it as the 16 house blocks beside and behind us were redeveloped into units. I was also aware over those years of many attempts to amalgamate the block with neighbours, all of which have failed. So we were, and you now are, faced with how to successfully develop a single domestic block of 550 square metres with a fall across the frontage of 2 metres and an overall fall of 8.5 metres, and crucially, an existing substantial building at the rear. My partners and I have been intimately involved with all the decisions made by the architects. What is crystal clear to me is that this design responds magnificently to the unique constraints of the site, occasioned by 3 things: its size being small, its steepness being very steep, and the need to keep the existing structure. I would argue strongly that the constraints of the site and existing concrete structure preclude ticking every box in the apartment design guide. But in my view, the design does very substantially achieve the ADG's aims and also those of Council's own guidelines. We remain more than willing to work with Council to refine any details required. In my view, the 22 reasons given for recommending refusal fall into roughly 6 categories. A single discretionary category item outside the various guidelines, which is height, and I'm going to address that very closely. Non-discretionary items which are outside the guidelines because of site constraints, such as insufficient street activation, etc. Items transgressing the guidelines by small amounts, such as 6% deep soil instead of 7. Housekeeping items where Council says the documentation is lacking or minor details need tweaking, such as BASIC's landscape plans and many others. These can hopefully be dealt with in conditions of consent. Items where council's assumptions or conclusions appear to be incorrect, such as the Sydney Blue Gum, privacy, overshadowing, inadequate site analysis, and cross-ventilation. Esoteric matters for judgment, such as design quality principles, design verification statement, and a few others. We believe...
Mr Fitzsimons, the 3 minutes gone, but have you got much more to say before we get into questions?
Got about another minute, but it's very, very crucial, if I may.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. I was personally responsible for the only discretionary departure from the guidelines being the height of the tower. So I'd like to put it to you clearly, my reasons for doing so. The height plane diagram on A3007 clearly shows that although we are well through the height limit for the tower, on average, we are very comfortably below it. My reasons for placing one more unit on top of the tower and one less on the existing as compared to early drafts are as follows. First and foremost, our design presents as 7 stories to the street, just as all recent nearby do. But at the rear, close to neighbours, we present as 4 stories, whereas many others are 8 or 9. Second, the switch produces 2 extra units with cross-flow ventilation, single floor use, no common walls, and views to the south, being the 6th floor unit itself and the tower unit at level 2. Top tower unit is much further away from all the neighbouring properties than the one it replaced on top of the existing. Overshadowing is primarily of our own site as the block runs close to due north-south and this unit is at the north edge. Much less building close to the Sydney Blue Gum. I sincerely believe that if I was a resident of any of the existing or proposed neighbouring units, I would far prefer the option of the current design rather than the fallback position of another unit on top of existing, which would potentially impact far more on the neighbour's solar access and acoustic privacy, and it's structurally more easily achieved. What we've set out to do here is to preserve our business premises and provide our potential buyers with generous 3-bedroom units of 150 square metres plus, with solar access, private lift access, views and thoughtful set-out. The experience of a lifetime has gone into it, and I believe passionately that the design fulfills that brief. I ask you to consider that we inherited a half-completed building, which, while functional, presents to the street as very low-key indeed. That's an understatement. My colleague Dougal and Gary will address you on many of the other aspects, but let me just close by saying that this design is the antithesis of the developer special. It emphatically does not just tick the boxes, seeking to maximise number of tight, sunless 1- and 2-bed units in order to maximise return. With your approval, we seek to upgrade this building to something with real architectural merit, which balances public and private interests. I commend the design to you, and I'm happy to answer.
Look, we'll get into that sort of detail in questions, I think, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm done.
All right.
Yeah, that's all finished.
Well,
that was my. Thank you.
I'll ask the panel, did you want to ask Mr. Fitzsimons questions now, or will we do all of our questions after we've heard the speakers? So we do the questions after I hear the speakers. I see Gregory and Peter are nodding. What do you say, Jim? Is Jim Coleman's happy we ask questions after we've heard from the 3 of you? Is that okay with you?
Absolutely fine.
Like Dougal Mackenzie next, eh?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Dougal.
Am I next or Gary?
Yeah, no, is it okay, Chair, if I speak now?
Gary, is that Gary, is it? Gary.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yep. So thank you, panel members. My name's Gary Chapman, Chapman Planning. I am the town planner for the application. I'll go through the reasons for refusal, but I'll try and group some of them, and when I get to those points, I'll let you know. David's outlined to you an existing building on the site, which is proposed to be retained. He's outlined to you the crossfall and slope on the site. And they are two important site elements, if you like, or even constraints that need to be taken into consideration when making assessment of this application. The other point to make, and it's shown on plan number, it's shown on all the basement plans, but A1001 issue B, and in the south west corner of the site there is a circle, and that is a sewer main, and hence and you'll see the existing building is setting back from that. I just point that out to you because that's existing Sydney water infrastructure, and if as the council report is speaking about, is that we're better off redeveloping the site, there is that constraint as well, and that constraint narrows up what can go at the rear of the site, and then it has potential conflicts or issues with being able to get driveway access and garbage down to that part of the site and to get the required turning paths. So what it did do is put the turning and the garbage collection towards the front, and hence there's other issues with that about the presentation to the street, which are raised in the reasons for refusal. With regards to which I'll get to, with regard to the reasons for refusal, the first item is height, and David largely addressed this when he spoke to you, when he presented to you just then about it. I'll just try and put that more into some planning speak, because the application does rely on clause 4.6. That is a test of whether the variation or the development, is consistent with the objectives of the zone and the standard. And if I just broadly put it into, is there a benefit in breaching the height control? As a planner on this site, I say there is. By putting the additional floor area on the tower element, you are achieving better residential amenity for the development itself. You are still presenting a 7-storey building to the street frontage that is consistent with the controls. You have a nil blank wall to your, to the eastern boundary, and potential for that adjoining site also to be developed to 7 stories. So by transferring, if you like, the floor area to the upper level, it has a better environmental planning design outcome for the subject site, and it is a better outcome towards the rear because it simply reduces amenity impacts to the property to the west and the property to the south. I think there are sufficient planning grounds to support the variation in this case. The other item that it does do is it proposes, or it includes, a rooftop terrace with lift overrun up to that terrace, communal open space, fantastic outlook, plus solar access for communal open space.
Right. Now, Mr. Mackenzie, we're already out of the 3 minutes, but I'm sure you've got more to say.
The problem is, Chair, with 22 reasons for refusal, I do have more to say.
Yes. Well, look, how does the panel want to handle it? Will we deal with the matters that we have questions about, or I'd like to give Mr. Mackenzie more time to put his case.
Yes, please.
Nods of yes from Peter Thornton and Jim Coleman, Gregory Flynn. Can you summarise what you're going to do, Mr. Chapman, and then I can tell you that we're concerned about. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So fair enough. I just thought that it.
And then
I'm going to group. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you. It's a bit difficult. I will group these items into the main areas of contention, I think, and that way we can move through it quicker. And I'll be very short on the next one. Floor space ratio. we say we comply, and there were floor space or gross floor area diagrams submitted with the application, and they're plans A3002, issue B.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other items. Keep going.
Now the council's saying that there should be more floor space. What do you say?
Council is saying, well, I disagree. First of all, I think council are counting an open corridor space at the ground floor level. That is unenclosed.
Mm-hmm.
It's also egress stairs adjoining the lift, which are excluded.
Mm-hmm.
And then the council report is saying that they get 8 square metres additional, I think, at each level. Well, these calculation plans are done on a CAD program, so I'm not sure where the discrepancy is at the other levels.
Okay. All right. What's the next point?
Item 3, which is insufficient street activation. 7, insufficient front setback. And there was another one here. Oh, look, I could even group 9, unsafe building entry.
Yeah.
What we have, what's proposed is a building with that the amended plans redesigned the pedestrian entry to the north east, and that pedestrian entry aligns with the existing ground level at the street frontage. You would have noticed when you went on site, there's a crossfall as you move down Merriwa Street.
Yeah.
We're also required, obviously, to put in. We've relocated the driveway ramp, and that needs to go to a certain gradient. So what the pedestrian entry is at the level of the street. It presents to the street. The ground floor level, as it is slightly elevated because we're required to get the required driveway access, ramp grade, and garbage collection. That does push up the activation of the street frontage, if you like, the business premises, but you'll still read it as a ground floor commercial premises from the street. That's consistent with the objectives of the zone. The other point to make here is that there's a criticism of the front setback. What the front setback is doing is you've got a nil setback at the corner, and then it's going to 4.8 metres to align with the building at 8 Merriwa Street. If I could just address, there's a criticism of insufficient information in terms of overshadowing. Plan.
Well, I think I can break in there and say the concern we had was, okay, you show the shadows in plan form, but quite often, and you've shown the sun angle shadows and sunlight access for your building, but not the adjoining building, particularly the one downhill. So we don't really know what the impact is on that eastern facade of number 8 Merriwa Street, I think it is, 844.
Yeah, okay. A4000 plan, if I understand correctly, and maybe we're getting cross paths in the plans we're looking at, but the plans A4006 to 4012 are solar views from the sun diagrams. Yes, they're picking up the solar access to the development, but they're modelling in the adjoining building at 8 Merriwa. And my understanding of this, and maybe Dougal can correct me if I'm not if I'm misdirecting you, is that the adjoining building side-facing windows are largely bedroom windows, and the living areas are to the front.
Right. Well, see, we don't know that. I haven't got anything that tells me that.
Right.
Okay. All right, go to the next point then.
Okay, thank you. There's a criticism about privacy impacts, and that's largely to the communal terrace. If I understand the report correctly, it's not the roof terrace, it's the terrace at the second floor plan, A1005. What this plan has tried to do, and then if you reference the landscape plan, is it's landscaping around the edge of if you like, the functional area, and with adequate separation, or getting people away from the edge, to put it bluntly, to mitigate any potential privacy impacts associated with that terrace area.
Yeah, it means you're probably about close to 9 metres from the edge of the terrace to the building number 8 Merriwell Street. Looking at the plan, you're talking about A1005, and then you've got the width of your planter.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So you're getting close to, well, you must be over 10 metres anyway, separation. But we don't know what you're going to plant in there. On landscape plan, give that amount of detail?
I thought they did. If you bear with, I definitely thought they did.
How high will they grow? There's plans shown on the elevation.
No, there's a.
All right, look, I think we can deal with that. Go to the next point.
There is landscape plans showing what's in there. Look, I'll finish up on this last point because I think I've covered the main planning issues anyway, and that is there's criticism about the impacts on the tree, which is a tree at the rear of the property, not on the subject site. It's my understanding, I think the owners have more idea of what branches overhang their site than I do, but I think they're thinking there's potentially only one branch that would need to be cut back. That's a branch that is already in poor state or even dead, and there wouldn't be 20% canopy reduction proposed.
Right. Okay. What about the 5-part test requirement? We're a bit worried about that because if we really need a 5-part test and we don't have one, then we can't really deal with the application.
We say that the 5-part test is not required because the tree is going to be retained, and the level of any level of canopy reduction is minor.
And what the loss of canopy isn't going to endanger the survival of the tree.
That's my understanding.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, panel, we'll still go on to questions at the end. We'll come back to each of them.
It's up to you, Mr. Chair, but I've got a few specific questions for Gary straight away, but come back to them later on.
Well, panel members, would you like Jim to go straight to his questions?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, Jim.
Okay. The first one is to do with the notion of street activation. And of course, the report claims that matter has not been satisfactorily addressed. Speaking to you as a planner, what's your response to that claim?
Well, the proposal has been designed with business premises ground floor level, an entry that corresponds to the street level. As you come down round the corner, down the hill in Merrier Street, you will see a presentation of a commercial premises and activation of the street frontage.
It's very narrow, and it would almost be a glimpse as you head down the hill, unless you're really looking for that entrance. So I guess it could be argued that activation is unlikely, or it's a secondary concern, that the design of that entrance has been determined by other factors. Maybe to come at it another way, how would you be able to tell us that frontage has sufficient activation to satisfy the council control?
Okay. Bear with me. And the control you're speaking to, is that clause 6.3 of the LEP? 6.6, is that the...
I haven't got the reference in front of me now.
Okay,
but the staff could,
well, the control speaks about that will not be used for residential accommodation or car parking. Well, that's clearly not what's proposed.
No, it's to do with the activation concept, that we have a frontage on a public road. It needs to be activated, needs to be evidence of people coming and going, etc., etc. So, and the council's view is that is not happening. It will not happen.
Well, that's the problem is that you the council's controls are asking you to set the building back. Yet, if you really want street activation, as you do in a B2 zone, you probably want a nil street frontage for the commercial premises, but that's not the case here. The council plan for the Gordon precinct tells you to set the building back, I think 6 metres. This has tried to meet it halfway. It's trying to give it a pedestrian entry that is at street level, and then landscape in front of a commercial premises that you will see from the ground level and from the street.
Okay. Have you any idea what the occupancy might be of those two commercial premises in terms of, say, workers or activities? Or I mean, are we going to be seeing a lot of people coming and going, or is it fairly small businesses that we're talking about?
No, look, I can't really comment, but I would have thought it's smaller businesses, to be honest. I mean, architects, planners, accountants, those sort of things.
Yeah, well, that would... Engineers. Yes, you'd derive that from the plans themselves. So perhaps I'm suggesting to you that whilst the number of people coming and going into this building might be small, there's still perhaps a failure on the part of the applicant to present the building with some kind of significant address that it will read as an important element in the streetscape, that this is a place for people to come and go. It's not just a little secondary entrance. What's your response to that?
Oh, I think I've responded. There's a clearly defined pedestrian entrance that is required for the commercial premises to be set back to meet the planning controls.
Yes. Okay. Now, the council is concerned about desired future character, and they, in their report, they say that they had discussions with you, and that you were offered guidelines about achieving compliance with desired future character. At the end of the day, though, the council's view is that was not achieved. What's your take on this notion of desired future character and how it was addressed by your proposal?
Look, I might, if I could, divert to the architect to answer that. But the proposal is consistent with the 23.5 metre height control. It's an isolated site. It's a small site. It's constrained. Future development of the corner site will be of a height that is consistent with that's proposed. So it's designed to fit in with that desired character of development of the corner. With regard to the way I think the architect was directed through discussions with council, where there were discussions about trying to bring the building or the ground level down in height, but and if I wasn't clear when I was speaking before, that couldn't be achieved because of the required driveway, ramp grades and waste collection that's required and positioned, in this case, at the front of the site.
Okay. Finally, the question of streetscape, which is obviously a town planning matter. Did you give serious thought as to how best this proposal might address the council's hopes for streetscape on the site?
Well, what the design is aiming to do is obviously get an entrance, but that might be, I think we might not be on the same page there, but it's also just getting landscaped area. So you go from the east corner, and which is the corner building where you have an entrance with a nil setback, if you like, then landscaping in front of a commercial premises that has some presentation to the street, and then the building then aims to align with the existing development at 8 Merriwa Street. So that's the way, and which I think is an acceptable streetscape presentation for this infill site.
Thank you.
All right. I've got a question to the architect, but I think we'll wait until we've heard from Mr. Mackenzie. Panel happy with that?
Yep. Yes.
All right. Mr. Mackenzie, would you like to speak now?
Sure, I'll be very brief. The problem with this site is a number of issues. One, it's an alteration addition of an existing building that we're keeping at the rear. Two, we have incredible slope, not only across the site, but to the rear. Three, we have tried to work with council and council's urban plans with regard to activating street front. But what they seem to fail to understand, and this is primarily the urban design consultant, that we have to get the garbage truck in, and as a result of that jacks up the podium at the front. This has been the problem all the way along. And when we tried to resolve this with council's urban designer, we got numerous sketches from them in hand form that simply didn't work. My clients are engineers. They have detailed analysis of the driveway, they have detailed analysis of the floor levels. They understand how these things work. And unfortunately, nothing that we received back from the urban designer for council in any way, shape or form helped us resolve this problem. It is a difficult site. It is a skinny site. And to say that it doesn't actually relate to the streetscape or the urban fabric of the surrounding area is ridiculous when you look at it in context with the surrounding area and the surrounding built form. There are a number of little issues here because of the nature of the site. If this was a clear site and we didn't have to do an alteration addition and we didn't fall off the back of a cliff and we didn't have a sewer pipe and we didn't have a tree and et cetera, we wouldn't be in these problems. But it's a very difficult site and it's not going to get perfection with regard to the ADG or any other DCP requirement. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was commendably brief, but I think the questions might take us quite a bit longer. If I can kick off questions, it's getting to the garbage truck issue. We've got an engineering report that says they want a double width driveway because of the difficulties of sight lines and all that sort of thing. So if you do a double width driveway, that means you're going to have to build the podium up even higher, I would have thought.
Well, it's going to eat in the podium. Yeah.
Sorry, what do you want to do?
Yeah. Yes, it will eat into the podium, but it can be achieved.
Yes.
So what happens here is we fight against each other. One says do this, one says do that. One says soft landscape, don't raise the podium. One says widen the driveway and decrease the podium.
Right. Okay. So
There's no easy solution.
right. So you're saying you're between the devil and the deep blue sea.
We've been between the devil and deep blue sea of this whole site, and primarily the biggest problem has been the whole streetscape activation and how you get in with the ramp and the stairs and the driveway because of the nature of the site.
Right. Okay. I can see that.
And by the way, my client actually has an approval to do. I think has an approval, but he's activated to have a 3 metre wide driveway.
Right.
That's true.
How do you mean he's got an approval? Was that for another development or something?
David, you want to answer that?
Yeah, am I on?
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have. Where I'm sitting right now is in the back half of an approval that was approved in the early 2000s. And so there's a driveway which is all approved and can be done under the old approval because we've already started the buildings, had substantial commencement. We don't particularly want to go that way, but we could do so.
Right. So, but this is a fresh application, isn't it?
This is a fresh application that takes into account over the 20 years, things have changed quite a bit. The height has changed and the floor space ratio has changed. And in fact, the levels that they will allow you on the driveway have changed. The current regulations make it much less steep than the approval that we already have. So again, at some level, you'd sort of think build the old driveway to the old levels steeper. That would go to the approval of 20 years ago, and then that would make it easier to get the levels for the garbage truck and so forth. But in the end, we just want to sit down with council, work out what is best to do with this difficult site, and get on with it.
All right, but you did. I take it in the previous garbage driveway, you didn't have 6 stories of apartments above it.
No, we just had 3 stories above it, and there was no access for garbage trucks. It was just a driveway to go into a car park.
Oh, okay.
We did
Okay.
2.6. Yeah, so this is just 20 years ago. They did the garbage on the street.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you can't achieve a 6 metre wide driveway at the correct gradients without really compromising the let's call it the activated street front.
That's it.
And also, if you do have to have a 6 metre wide one, I would think you've got to put the podium up higher again, haven't you?
No, we just reduced the size.
Sorry?
It may affect your business, the width of the business premises or the commercial premises frontage to the street.
Yeah, that's the compromise, isn't it?
Yeah.
You take out part of that front commercial premises.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But we are willing to do that, anything to get it through the gap.
Right, okay. Now, the panel have other questions? I've got more, but I'm sure the panel has questions.
Yes, I
Peter Thornton's got his hand up. So is Greg. Can we take Peter first?
Thanks, Kevin. Look, I don't know a lot, but not being sort of a planner, I don't know a lot about this issue of street activation, but just looking at the plans, I'm going to pose a question which perhaps is a question for my fellow panelists and as it is for the applicant. But just looking at the facade that faces onto Merriwa Street, it does seem to me that there is a clear differentiation of style between the what would be the office levels, the street level offices, and the rest of the building. And so my question is, look, can you achieve activation by virtue of, say, signage or lighting or those sorts of features which actually these plans don't show, such that it would help to further delineate the fact that the usage of this level is different to those of the ones above.
Dougal, over to you.
We can. That was a question.
But
Oh, look, of course you could. You could do a whole range of things. It's just a very difficult situation because the actual commercial component is not all that big because of the difficulty of the site. But there's a lot of things we could do.
But the question is, as I understand it, what you've got to show is that this is different. Is that what activation means? You've got to show that it's different to the rest.
Well, in terms of what council are trying to say, we're not exactly sure what they're trying to say because as Gary just pointed out earlier, street activation is generally when you actually have a nil setback from a commercial premises to the ground floor. That's what they talk about. And if you look at all commercial properties around the place, that's generally what they are. Now we've gone back, 4+ meters. So in actual fact, it'll never be in those terms strictly activated. Now I don't necessarily agree with nil building line being active and 4 meters back being non-active, but that's the problem we have here. And the other problem we have is you've got to get up and get over the garbage area and the ramp below. So it's never going to be that. It can't be that because of the constraints. And this is what we've been fighting with the whole time.
Right.
Thank you.
I know, can I just insert a question there because it's relevant to Peter's question. As I understand it, the development control plan applicable requires the corner site, which is the funeral director, if they develop, they've got to have the 6 metre setback too in Merriwar Street, but not on the highway. Is that?
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure.
No, I thought the corner. My understanding was the DCP, the building at the corner. There was also a nil setback turning the corner, if you like. Into Merriwar Street.
If you look at the controls, it's a bit vague, I think.
Right.
No, I've got it here. Hang on, I'll just.
Can we ask the staff?
Yes, I am. I'm just. Who wants to answer that?
So it's 5 metre setback up to the corner.
Okay.
But the portion of the funeral home site that fronts the highway isn't subject to the 5 metre setback.
Right. That's Jonathan Goodwill. Can you hear him? He said the 5 metre setback goes right up to the corner.
Okay.
So it sounds like council are trying to achieve more of a residential setback there down Merriwar. Is that right?
Yeah, I think to me it's a transition between the highway and the residential in Merriwar Street. Is that for the council's intention?
The transition to that landscape segment along Merriwar Street.
All right. Well, look, I think that's all I want to know. Can I go back to the panel members for questions?
Can I go?
You had questions.
Yeah, look, this is really about, it seems to me there's the applicants raising all of these issues, the council raised issues, but they haven't come together to actually discuss the potentially the issues. I think what we've got here is effectively 7 pages of refusal reasons. I know you met, or council provided the applicant with information back in March saying that there was major issues with it, and you also raised those back in December at your initial pre-DA meeting. So you advised of council's issues back in March. You actually addressed some of those and lodged amended plans. It went back on exhibition. We had one further submission that didn't raise any further issues. But I just wanted to ask the applicant, were you aware of potentially the grounds for, or the recommendation that's in the business paper today? Were you aware of those before the business paper was actually released?
I'll answer that. Gary can follow on. Yeah, of course we were. Of course, we've been trying and struggling to actually clarify what is the best outcome on this street activation issue for months. It hasn't been something that just sprung upon us. And by the way, 7 pages of refusal. I mean, if you actually dig down and you look at those 7 pages of refusal, this is not unlike council, the way they adopt their approach to these things. So we don't believe these issues are insurmountable at all. In actual fact, we argue the case that in fact a lot of these issues are easily resolved.
All right, that's fine. Seems to me there's a number of major issues there, but if they were resolved, a lot of these other ones would fall away. But
yeah, I think there was discussion about. Sorry.
So can I ask you a question again? Were you aware of the specific issues that are grounds for refusal today?
No.
So you haven't met with the council?
Dougal, I didn't see the 22 reasons for refusal until, whenever it's made publicly available. But is that your office? I don't know. I can't answer for you, the applicant's office.
So who's the applicant here? Is it the town planner, the architect? Don't you have one set of meetings with council?
Yeah, we all meet together with council, and we've had 2 years worth of meetings trying to resolve all of these issues. And from my personal point of view, I've been aware of pretty well all of these issues from the beginning and got into it. And from our point of view, what we see is that council, every time we do something, they want us to do something else. They give us some idea of what they want, and none of what they give us works. So we just, because it's steep and because it's narrow and because it's this and because it's that, we just can't get to where they want to go. And whenever we do ask them what it is they want to do, they haven't got any answer. They just throw us under the bus and say, well, it doesn't comply, go away again. And so we go away and talk to our architects and wander around and come up with something else. We hope that might do it, but in the end, they're asking, as I see it, something impossible to achieve. They want to achieve, 10 different things, of which the last 5 mean the first 5 you can't do. They work against each other, and it just. I would sit in a room in a heartbeat and just say, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to resolve this? Just let's all knock our heads until we do it this way, and then we say, okay, it's done, and then it's done, and then it's done. This is the last time I went to Ku-ring-gai Council. We did exactly that in front of the Land and Environment Court, and we horse traded an outcome in half an hour that had taken 6 months of knocking heads and getting absolutely nowhere. That was in 2008.
Okay, just on that, like even if my understanding is the 4.6 submission, clause 4.6 submission hasn't even addressed all of the development standards. If that's the case, we couldn't even approve it. Haven't you sat down with the council and gone through those and sorted them out? And is there an opportunity to do that?
Well,
would there have been an opportunity?
Why do you say the clause 4.6 doesn't address the development standard?
I understood reading the report it hadn't addressed certain issues like floor space ratio and so forth.
Oh, well,
it was only a minor variation.
Floor space ratio is in contention because the applicant says they comply. We weren't given the opportunity to assess that or put on a without prejudice clause 4.6 variation because this appeared in the council report.
Yeah, well, that's why I actually asked up front. Have you?
Yeah, I know. That's what I thought.
You haven't gone through each of these individually and sorted out.
We did not know of that issue before it was published on the website or whatever.
And then there was the design verification statement that needed amending and the basics that needed to be reviewed and amended as well. Were you aware of that?
Dougal?
No, not until a week ago. Until Friday.
All right. Well, they're basically all grounds for refusal, and they seem to me they require further information myself. So I just wanted to know whether you knew about it. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I put forward just a proposition, just so we can understand each other a bit better? It seems to me that it's quite important for the council streetscape, if you like, of Merriwar Street and the highway to have a transitional form around the corner. And as we've already touched on, the 5 metre setback to the street is in order to try and get a transition from the busy highway into the residential. And part of that is to step the buildings down to the residential height limit. Now, you're clearly 1 story above the height limit, it would seem. And that's all part of this transition and streetscape question. Taking the top floor off the building and lowering it by that much takes away a lot of issues. What's your comment on that as a potential condition?
We say that every building that seems to be built anywhere close at the moment seems to be 7 stories or 8 or 9. And we've gone through why, I looked very carefully at this right from the beginning, how we could do it. And we could drop back to taking off 1 story at the top and putting it at the back over the top. As Gary said very eloquently, that could work. We could do that, but it has all sorts of negative outcomes, being more overshadowing, more overlooking, less privacy, acoustics, and these sorts of things. And I say absolutely clearly that if I was a neighbour, I would far prefer to have the unit on top of the tower extra rather than an extra tower over the back of the rear thing, because it's just that much further away. The overlooking issues are not important because you're already overlooked by every other unit plus what we're intending to build. So I just see if you look very carefully, there's just not an issue anywhere where it's better to do it at the low level than to do it at the high level. But, if we had to do it at the low level, I guess we would consider that.
All right. Well,
The only other thing to add
just
to
let
that is
me,
that
Peter, just before I switch to you, I just wanted to make an observation that within the reasonable powers of the panel, we could perhaps put a condition on that you take off the top floor. But the trouble is, what we couldn't do is then say just add 1 at the back, because that would require a new set of plans. And it would have to be a question of a review of the application or an amended application. But what's your opinion on that sort of proposition?
And so, what we do at the high level, at the stroke of a pen, just take the top off. Well, I see that that's sort of like a horse trading idea of how to do it. But I would argue strongly that it simply doesn't achieve all the things that a council seems to want to do. I really feel that, to go from 7 stories to 6 stories, it makes such little difference to everybody. I can't imagine that anybody looking at it and saying, well, gee, that's a much better result because it's 6 stories instead of 7. I just don't see it happening. It's like horse trading something. We can't fix up what you want of street activation at street level. So let's just knock a thing off the top and we'll call it done. Well, that's a sort of a horse trading idea, and we would consider it. But I just don't see it as a reasonable man, as a thinking, logical way of doing things. I just don't see it as a reasonable way of thinking it through.
All right. Well, look, there's obviously an extended issue that the height limit on your side also applies to the Pacific Highway corner lot, the funeral directors. So
Yeah.
if you go a floor over the height limit, it means that if the funeral director side ever gets developed, they would logically argue that they should have a floor above the height limit as well. So you can see.
No, but you see,
consistency.
here's the thing. Think about this very carefully. At the northeast corner, we are at the height limit.
yes, correct.
So-
That's a very important point. Yeah.
And if so, when they start doing their height limit, they will start around 1 metre higher because the road keeps lifting up towards the top of the hill there. So I'd have to look very carefully at the survey, but I'm guessing it's certainly more than 0.5 metre. I think it's probably more like 1.5 metres. So when they do their height limits, they will start 1.5 metres against our higher than our northeast corner. So I would argue if they do 7 stories, they'll be at least half a metre higher than what we're proposing, and I would think it's much more closer to 1.5 metres.
Okay, okay. Now, Peter Thornton had a question.
Yes, look, in trying to understand how this development sat in the streetscape, I went looking for an elevation of the streetscape which looked at the DCP controls for the Gregory and Carr site, and then your proposal, and then obviously 8 Merriwa Street. Now, I couldn't really see that. So the question that Kevin's been asking is sort of similar. Mine is very similar to Kevin's question, that the top level on your northeast corner, how does that relate to what happens at Gregory and Carr? Now, the drawings that you provided, the isometrics, I found a bit difficult to understand, so it really would be helpful to understand that. And then my question for your planner probably is, are you entitled to the roof garden in addition to the 7 stories at the northeast corner?
Gary.
Is that a permitted?
Well, it's that the roof garden is entitled, is with all due respect, not the right word, but it is over the height control. There's no, and that is over the height control. The building at the front is within the height control. So then in behind that is the communal roof terrace, which is over the height control. However, that roof terrace does contribute to residential amenity. Instead of having a communal roof, the roof terrace that's down on level 2, whilst it's functional, can be used, doesn't receive, has an issue with solar access, and potentially when the corner site gets developed for 7 stories. So what the roof terrace is doing is contributing to residential amenity, really visually from the street presentation and as you view heights with minimal impact.
So
it's not a form that's going to read as an additional story or be outside a desired future character.
All right. More questions? Or Peter, do you want to continue?
Well, it was really just that ability to read the full streetscape from the Gregory and Carr site down a bit further. That I just really needed to understand that.
Yeah, look, it's very difficult when you stand on the street. You've got to go over the other side of the road, really. And if you go over the other side of the road, I think you'll hit the 7th story visually. That's just how it works, the street width, etc. And
Gary, just so I understand, are you talking about the other side of Merriwa Street on the corner of the Pacific Highway, or are you talking about going over the other side of the Pacific Highway?
I know. I meant Merriwa Street and the western side of the Pacific Highway.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, yes. Just if I could just
sorry.
I was going to say I've certainly done that, and I note that the opposite corner from Gregory and Carr on Merriwa Street is currently under development, I think, and so its height limit again is I think 7 stories.
I think it is
along there, but it's the I'm not sure what the RL of the roof would be in regard to your RL. Probably higher.
Very similar.
Very similar.
Well, and that's because, as David's pointed out, that the slope the highway is about 1.5 meters higher or whatever.
Yes, indeed.
All right. More questions, Jim?
Yes,
Jim Coleman.
I'm sorry to go back over old territory, but I'd like the architect to just take me through his first thoughts when he was given the brief, program, spatial needs, etc. Your first thoughts about determining the height of the residential component. Coming at it with an open mind, as it were, but you've got the program.
Is he there?
Dougal, you're going to answer that?
Hello?
Yes, it's for Dougal.
Yeah, Dougal, you
Seems
there?
I've lost Dougal. I can't see him on the screen.
No, I think he's gone.
Mm.
Can we get him back?
You want me to try? Is that,
Well, somebody's got to ring him.
I got several questions for him.
Does the council officer? Hello again. I'm sorry for that break, but when the council officer, the technical officer, cut in to try and do something about it, we went into a temporary pause. The council officer is trying to get hold of Mr. Mackenzie again to bring him back online. In the meantime, Jim says that he thinks maybe Gary Chapman can answer another question. Over to you.
Is Gary there?
yes, I am. Yes.
Okay. Yes, Gary, I was going to put this to Dougal, but it's probably in your territory as well. It's to do with the rationale for retaining the existing building.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, there were certain factors which your team must have considered before you made the decision to retain the existing structure. Can you take us through the thinking that went into that that consideration and how you reached?
Gary, maybe I could interrupt here because I think I'm across that. That's David speaking. Look, as I said in my opening address, there was never any suggestion in my mind, and there will never be any suggestion while I own this site, that we would take down 1,000 square metres of concrete built about 17 or 18 years ago, pre-stressed, in perfect condition on huge pile foundations. If you walked away from this site for 10,000 years, it would still be here. I use my words advisedly. So the whole thing that we have had in our brains from the very beginning, and it'll be there at the end, is that the existing structure remains. We've been saddled with that, and then we've got to do something at the front to make it work. I mean, as you all looked at it from the street, it presents in a very low-key way at the moment from the street, to be polite about it. And what we seek to do is to take what is there, 1,000 square metres of the best concrete God ever made, and put something in front of it that will make it work. It just makes no sense to me to even consider taking down 1,000 square metres of really good concrete that's just there, it's usable, and then you pay to take it down and then pay to put it back, and the noise and from every other reason, we just have to keep it. And then even if you did take the view, okay, look, with a clean sheet of paper, this site didn't have that building on it, you still can't build down to the side because of the sewer. So you're going to end up putting back roughly what you've already got there, and you won't achieve anything that will affect your ability to do your articulation and all the rest of that stuff. So from every point of view, you are stuck with the existing building.
Well, I accept that rationale. There's a lot of merit in it. I was more concerned with the subsequent decision. Having decided to retain the existing building, then there was a question of how high will you make the residential component. And this was
Okay, well, I can tackle that too, because it was my decision. What happened was the architects looked at it all, and we decided how we would do it, and we looked at the floor space ratio, and we originally had drawings which showed 2 stories of addition over the 4 stories existing at the back and 6 at the front. So that is a fallback position, which, you know, we already have drawings of that showing that and doing that, with everything else unchanged. So you just have exactly what you've got here, except it's 6 stories high, and then at the back, instead of being 4 plus 1, it would be 4 plus 2. I looked at it one day in my office and said, is the wrong way to do it. And the reason is that we now put a big unit over the top of the existing. What does that unit have? It doesn't have any sun. It doesn't have the outlook that the one at the top of the building would have. It's closer to all of the other neighbours, south, southeast, southwest, and due west. So I just looked at it and said, okay, we should take that unit there off the top of the existing and put it on the top of the tower. I did it just drew it up in my office, and I looked at it and looked at what the outcome would be. And I saw that at the corner, we would be at the height limit. We were already a little bit through the height limit. My view was, and I looked around at what everybody else was doing and said, 7 stories is what everybody is doing. But, you know, from every point of view, you do a better tower. It doesn't make, to me, I think I'm a reasonable, logical man. I think if you look from the street and see a 6-story tower or a 7-story tower, I don't see that the average man will see a huge difference from that. Whereas if I lived east, west or south of this block, because there are 42 units about to be built on the Pacific Highway to the south east of us. Now, I think half of those units would far prefer, you know, would be affected by putting a unit over the top. Not badly affected, and if we have to do it, we would do it. But I think if you ask any of them, would you prefer to have a building right here about 6 or 8 or 10 metres away from you at the same level as you, with people looking out through the windows direct at you, or would you rather have something way up there, 20 or 30 metres away, up in the sky, way away from you? It overlooks you, but all the other buildings overlook you too. And it's not overshadowing, because it overshadows our own site primarily. There would be the odd hour in the middle of winter where it might be overshadowing more, but I think on any analysis of it, I just looked at it and I said, that's where we should do it. I put it to the architect, they agreed. That's what we've put in front of you.
All right.
Can I just say that was put to me for an assessment under clause 4.6 as well. So it wasn't just that.
Sorry, Mr. Chapman, can you start again? You were talking over it for a moment.
Sorry, I apologise. I just so David just mentioned that was put to the architect. It was put to me as well as a test under clause 4.6.
All right.
To vary the height.
Now look, a council officer has advised me they've tried to contact Mr. McKenzie and they're simply getting a message. So I'm just wondering what other questions the panel might have. Are there any other questions the panel wish?
Yeah. The east elevation of the...
That's Jim Coleman.
Yes, of the tower. Drawing number A2001. I don't see any openings on that elevation. My immediate conclusion is that it's designed.
It's on the boundary.
Yes. So it's facing another building which is yet to be designed.
Yes.
So you took the choice. There'll be no windows on that elevation, even though it's east. Was that on the assumption that a future building next door would be so close that I see.
Yeah,
it'll be on the boundary. It'll be on the boundary.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that a matter for a future council to determine a setback on that side? Because you're sacrificing a lot of eastern light and morning light. sunshine.
Because of the width of this site, you need to build to the boundary for fire separation, but also to meet, if you were to do even a non-habitable with windows in it, even non-habitable rooms,
Yes.
you need a minimum of 4.5 metre setback.
I see.
So it's been designed to fit, if you like, with a building that comes around that corner and with a nil setback.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a trade-off on your part. We'll have no windows, no light, no sunshine on the assumption.
No, but the way we do, if you like, get away with it on this, and it wouldn't work on other sites, I agree with you, but this has the north orientation. So the units have all been designed with their habitable space, or balconies, with having the north orientation in their living areas.
Yeah, okay.
So they're all 3-bedroom cross-through units with the living space to the north.
With a due north balcony, which in midwinter we'll get sun. As the sun comes up, it'll hit straight onto that balcony and into your lounge room. Just how you want it.
Yes, understand that. Any more questions?
Just one.
Yes, who was that?
Peter.
Yes, Peter.
I'm just wondering, we were talking about the Gregory and Carr site. Have you consulted with the owners of these adjacent sites? The ones that haven't been developed yet?
Yes, many times. I mean, over 20 years, I would say there's been, that I'm aware of, half a dozen times when the various sites have tried to get together. And in fact, we've been approached, in the last, 6 months to sell to the whole thing, to amalgamate it. As I said in my initial things, over 20 years, the sites have been tried to be amalgamated, but for whatever reason, it just hasn't happened. My impression is that Gregory and Carr basically just don't want to do it. The actual site is owned by an American, as I gather it, with a 30-year lease or something, and so it's just not really on that that's going to happen. Although who knows, with anything can happen, but the proof's in the pudding. For 20 years, it's been tried to happen, and it hasn't happened.
Just as a supplementary sort of comment, perhaps, then, given what you've just said about that wall, your proposal will not constrain the development of the Gregory and Carr site or the one at 844 Pacific Highway. So you're
not at all.
Imposing no constraints.
Gregory and Carr have the opportunity to, if you like, abut to the wall proposed on the subject site, and then it actually has the northeast orientation, so it'll be able to achieve residential amenity. Without not affected by the subject site.
Okay, thank you.
Jim's got another question.
Yeah, this is a very minor technical point, but it appears, if you look at the external, the elevation A3001 external finishes, I understand the finishes, but there's also quite a big undercroft, which is not explained under the building, the existing building. How is that space going to be dealt with?
No, there is no undercroft. There isn't any.
There isn't any?
There is no undercroft that we're aware of. I'm not sure.
Which plan were you on, sorry?
Well, I'm looking at the external finishes elevation, which is A2001, 3001. I visited the site, and of course you can't see what's behind that large wall with the glass bricks, but
what you see there is what's already there, and then the undercroft, you mean the very low bit right at the ground level?
Yeah.
Okay. It's about 1.5 metres high, and there's nothing in it at the moment. It's not seen by anything. There's just greenery and so forth. But we stand ready to do whatever council or neighbours or anybody interested would like to do.
All right, I think that's fine.
Yeah, that's enough.
Nothing else?
No.
All right. Any other questions, Gregory?
Yeah. I wouldn't mind asking the staff a couple of questions, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
If we wanted to approve this application, as I said before, the report talks about clause 4.6 variation. Could the staff just tell me, is that what's missing from the what standards haven't been addressed in the 4.6 variation?
Council's position is that the building exceeds the floor space ratio.
Yeah.
The applicant's position differs, as you just heard from Mr. Chapman.
Yep. Is
Council's
there another
position is that as the building exceeds the floor space ratio, consent cannot be granted in this respect without a 4.6 being submitted and considered.
So am I looking at the FSR that was identified in the report that it allows 1,383.75 square metres. The application itself is 1,395, which is a variation of only 11.95 square metres, which is pretty minor, but it still has to be addressed in the 4.6. Is that correct? If that's the view of the, it all comes down to standards and how it's interpreted. The council have a different view than the applicant.
Yeah, if the application is over on the floor space ratio, it cannot be consented to unless there is a 4.6 variation request and accepted.
To address that 11.95 square metres.
That's right.
But what other, is there any other clauses relevant in there that haven't been addressed in the 4.6?
No.
So it's only the FSR?
That's right.
Okay. So just on the other matters that are addressed in the report, design verification statement, does that need amending to satisfy the requirement?
It does.
Okay. So how does that need amending? Like one simple thing was the signature, wasn't it, of the architect?
The applicant will have to put together a compliance table in relation to that design guidelines.
So from your point of view, it's essential that it has to be done?
It does, yeah.
Okay. And the revised basic certificate has to be done?
It has to be.
And could we get advice on whether the 5-part test is required?
Council's position is that it is required.
So it's council's view that it must be done. And if it's not done?
Then the application couldn't lawfully be consented to.
Okay. Thank you. No, I haven't got, I'm finished, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Peter, have you got any more questions?
I don't think so. Thank you.
All right. I don't.
Can I have one more go? Is that possible? David speaking.
Well, what's it about, Mr. Fitzsimons?
I just to sign off, just on how we might resolve this as a possibility.
Well, yes, we'll hear that.
There's 30 seconds. The last time I was in front of council, as I think I said earlier, just couldn't get anywhere. Just couldn't get anywhere. On a tiny little development beside my house in Spencer Road, until we got to the Land and Environment Court, and we sat down in a room with all the relevant people, with the commissioner next door having a cup of tea in my lounge room, and in 1 hour we horse traded an outcome. I'm just wondering whether in this case we could just get, it's harder obviously with COVID, but could we just get everybody together and say, look, we're just not going to eat until we say, okay, we've got to do this, we've got to tick that box, and we just have an agreed thing. On that previous one, what we did was we literally had a piece of a whiteout and a ruler and a pencil, and the lawyer marked up the drawing, and we said we're going to do that, and we got a result in an hour that we couldn't get in 6 months. Took some tens of thousands of dollars of time, effort, and lawyers, and so forth. But I just feel like here, I passionately believe that we have a wonderful design here. Our architects have had a really close look, had a red hot go at trying to fix this, and I reckon it can be fixed. And I really believe if we just built it exactly as it is in front of you, if we believed that if we just did it right as it is now, it would be a magnificent outcome for everybody, not just for us, for the public, for the council, for everybody else. But I understand that we've got to go through some hoops, and we stand ready to do anything that's reasonable to make this work. I reckon if we got into a room with with the architect, with the planner, with council's officers, with the thought that we just need to get a result here rather than, if we end up this with, okay, it's gone, next minute, what are we doing? We're spending money at the Land and Environment Court. That's going to be the outcome. urges, could we avoid that by just getting together with goodwill on both sides, saying, what can we do to make this excellent design work? Get a tick and everybody go on and do something else, and then we can build it.
All right, well, Mr. Fitzsimons, the panel will consider that submission.
Thank you.
The panel is more constrained, if I can say that, than is the Land and Environment Court in terms of negotiating on the proposal the way you've described. So we're not quite as free to do that as you might like. We can do certain things.
No, I understand. Anyway, maybe what you can do is recommend that the council and the architects and the clients get together and tick the 5-part test, the ASICs revised, the FSR. We should be able to just make all those go away by sitting there and saying, well, what do we do to tick that box?
We'd have to adjourn the application and our decision in order to enable that to happen. We'll consider that as an option, okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, since there's nothing more we can discuss right now, and this is the only matter on our agenda, with the consent of the other panel members, I'll close the meeting, the public section of the meeting, and we'll now go into private conference to discuss everything we've heard, including all the documents we have before us, and come to a decision today. Okay, so thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you, panel.
Fitzsimons,
thank you,
Gutman, and you can thank Mr. Kenzie on our behalf too. Very good.
Okay, very much.
Thank you.
We commend it to you.